Hello everyone, I'm Kenny, the Basic Brit, and today I'm going to run down my 10 favourite ever adventures. Now, this comes with a caveat. I got back into dungeon mastering in the 4th edition of D&D, a much maligned version of the game. I personally have a lot of fond memories from running that game, even though I have gone a very different route now, and I mainly, pretty much exclusively run either basic fantasy role-playing game or BFRPG games. With that being said though, I've had a lot of fun with 4th and 5th edition D&D in the past, so it might surprise you to see the majority of the adventures on this list are going to be from there. Some of them I have converted into basic fantasy role-playing game, and they are going to populate my custom world that I'm building around the Western lands from the Morgan's Fort campaign setting. But without any further ado, let's just get straight into the list. So coming in at number 10, we have a little known adventure that has gone under a lot of people's radars in the past, as it was snuggled into the back of the first Dungeon Master's guide in 4th edition. It is the Kobold Hall. Now, this is a fantastic little introductory adventure to get new players used to not just 4th edition, but dungeon crawling in general, I'd say. It's a brilliant little adventure with pesky trap-setting kobolds. You get the chance to take a bounty from the lord of a local town. They invade the home base of a group of kobolds that have been pestering the tradeways near there, and the opportunity to either talk themselves out of a scuffle or defeat a young adolescent white dragon with some really great loot at the end of it. It's a really easy adventure to convert into BFRPG or BFRPG rules, and it's just a fantastic little introductory adventure. And I wanted to mention it because I really do feel like a lot of people miss this in 4th edition. Okay, number 9. Number 9 for me, it's going to be, and apologies to all my grognard friends out there, it's going to be Curse of Strahd. So the reason why I'm picking Curse of Strahd over the original Ravenloft is, even though I have pored over the pages of the original Ravenloft quite a lot, I played and had a really fun time twice in Curse of Strahd. We never beat it. We had a TPK both times. The first time was a very unfortunate fall off the bridge outside of Strahd's castle, Castle Ravenloft. What I love about this is, I know it's been spoken about to death, but the real sense of gothic horror that you can get from this one, which is, it can be rare that you get a group to buy into that idea. You have to have a good group of players and a good DM to really get the most out of it. I know people have got issues with the 5th edition version, but for me, I think it's definitely worthy of a top 10 in anyone's list. The fact that you can get dragged into this nightmarish realm, perfect for characters that are just starting out their adventuring career, or for those that are a little bit more weathered around the edges. This is an adventure that tests the players almost as much as it tests the player characters as well. There's a lot of thinking that can go into this one. A really great aspect of it is the replayability, the randomness of the tarot deck that Madam Eva gives you at the start of the adventure, the card reading. There's a really great little introductory adventure kind of snuggled into this one, the Death House right at the start. You can leave that out completely, or use it as a means to kick off the adventure from the start. It's iconic, it's got probably the best written vampire villain since Dracula, and it stands the test of time. It's been through so many iterations that it deserves a place at number 9 on my list. Okay, number 8 is going to be The Sunless Citadel. Probably up there with another very famous adventure as one of the most played starter adventures to ever grace the tables of RPG players all around the world. Now, the Sunless Citadel sees your group travelling down into a castle that has sunken beneath the earth through a great cataclysm, and within the sunken castle there is an evil deeper down. But what's fantastic about this adventure for me is it really conveys to the players the diplomacy pillar of the game. The way that they do that in this adventure is goblins have stolen a white dragon wormling, a new hatchling, from a group of kobolds. You can side with the goblins or the kobolds. There's a funny little character called Meepo who wants to get his little baby dragon back. I know when I ran this for my group of players back in the day, Meepo ended up getting completely obliterated by the young white dragon, who did not want to go back under the protection, in quotation marks, of the kobolds. And once the players have finished navigating the first level of the sunken castle, where the goblins and the kobolds are warring against each other, they descend even further down still and confront an evil druid who is tending to his twisted version of a woodland grove, and at the centre of this grove is the Gulthias tree, which is a really interesting bit of lore that I just loved reading about. So the Gulthias tree is grown from the stake that stake through the heart of a vampire, and it gives off these fruits that will either give the person who consumes them a boon or a blight. And I think the evil druid is a really well done trope in this adventure, and for me personally, I like having a human antagonist. I like to keep the fantastical to my players, so the opportunity to have an evil, nefarious human pulling the strings in the background is always welcome at my table. It's welcome at a lot of other people's tables as well, as this is one of the most famous starter adventures there is, and that's why it goes at number 8 on the list. Okay, number 7. We're heading back to my preferred rule set now. So this is the basic fantasy adventure JN1, The Chaotic Caves, written by JD Neal. For me, the way that basic fantasy is laid out, how the people who contribute to basic fantasy and how they write, I find The Chaotic Caves an excellent, and dare I say it, superior product to the original Keep on the Borderlands. It's got everything I want out of a sandbox adventure setting. It's a perfect mashup of all those old TSR starter adventures for me. The caves themselves have got politics, different kinds of monsters, there's a lot of variety. You can literally take pieces of the caves themselves and put them anywhere in your game world, which is what I do with this adventure. I just get so much back out of this adventure for the low cost of absolutely free. The cost of it does come into how I rated it a little bit. I use this in nearly every single campaign of basic fantasy that I run. There's also a good couple of adventure locations that are additional to the caves in this, which I really enjoyed with some other groups that I've run it for. I've just had such a fun time running the content that's in this book. So that's why it is up at number 7 on the list. Number 6. So sticking with the basic fantasy theme, and considering this is coming above the Chaotic Caves, even though I've never run it, it just proves how good this little adventure is. When I read it, it just really gets my imagination going, and I think it's such an evocative little adventure. It's the Black Apple Brew by Kyle Hettinger. I think the thing that attracts me the most to this book is the way that the races are portrayed in this. It's very old English fantasy feeling. The elves are mysterious and a little bit insidious as well. There's fairies who are mischievous, and it really calls back to them old English fables and the mythos and superstitions that the English had about these creatures. It has themes kind of like the Pied Piper, where children are going missing or children are acting out against their parents, but it's not as simple as the parents first maybe think it is. There's a nearby insane asylum, some really interesting locations in this one, and the brew itself is really well described, the brew being the lair of the Elf Lord. And for a basic fantasy book, for me this has got some of the best art in the whole of basic fantasy. It's really striking, that classic black and white grayscale art that you used to see in the old TSR adventures. If you need a starting tone for a human-centric campaign, you can't go far wrong with this one. Okay, number 5. So number 5, we're heading back to 4th edition for this one, and it is another adventure that was never published by itself. It came as part of the D&D Essentials line in the Monster Vault with Small Tome, which was effectively a remaster of the Monster Manual, and a load of cardstock tokens for playing around the table. And in the back of that box set was a little adventure called The Cairn of the Winter King. Now, this adventure sees the party in a town beset by an unnatural winter after a visitor comes to town. They have to set off to find the source of the winter and put it to rest. And through this, they will discover an old dungeon in which resides the Winter King, a powerful being who requires the return of his powerful magic item, a scepter. An unnatural winter starts to creep in after a visitor rolls in. He is followed by a skyship, a talking skyship that demands the return of the Winter King's scepter, and the players are thrust into this adventure, basically beset by the local lord to go and stop whatever's causing this. Now, parts of this adventure are a little bit goofy. Me and my group had loads of fun in the actual dungeon itself. Me, as a dungeon master, I didn't enjoy running the whole skill challenge thing too often in 4th edition, but the dungeon itself was that much fun for me and my group of players. That's really what puts it so high on my list. It was one of those classic D&D nights. I had, I believe it was 7 players around the table with me DMing, and we went from 10 AM till it must have been 2 AM solid, just little breaks for food and toilet. The adventure itself is a blast. I'm converting it again to fit into my basic fantasy campaign. It is such a fun dungeon crawl. There's great loot hidden in a vault. There's interesting dynamic enemies that are in here. There's a frozen chapel that contains a white dragon. There's monstrous classics like the Otyugh. There's plenty of undead for your clerics and paladins to slay. Overall, just another fantastic little book hidden away in what was probably one of the better products of 4th edition. Number 4. So going back to the old school for number 4, and an adventure that splits people right down the middle. This is Marmite for our adventurers. It's going to be the Tomb of Horrors. I've played in it twice, I've run it once. I've enjoyed it every time. I think I enjoyed it so much because we were clear around the table that we're playing the Tomb of Horrors and it's going to be a death trap dungeon. Would I sprinkle this into a campaign out of the blue and spring it on my players? No. But as a test for players, it's fantastic. Gary Gygax knew what he was doing with this adventure. It's so simple, but the perfect example of a death trap dungeon. The brief synopsis is your players' characters they've heard rumours about the tomb of a lich called a Serarak with untold riches inside. They try and find their way in, if they even manage to get in at all, as there's some pretty deadly traps before you even get into the main halls of the dungeon, and then things just get even worse from there, depending on your point of view. I had an absolute blast with this one. Hearing the DM describe the green devil face for the first time and what happens to unlucky adventurers who interact with it who are a bit too curious around it. Serarak, the demi-lich himself, is just a great, wild, deadly villain that would make your blood curdle. Yes, it's unfair. Yes, PCs are gonna die. Yes, the DM is gonna feel like he's being an absolute bastard to everyone. But that's the way it was written. It's intended to test the thinking abilities of your group, not so much the characters and the character sheet in front of them. It's a classic for a reason. It always gets remade for different editions of D&D. It's been expanded on a number of times, and it will forever live within the zeitgeist of role-playing games. For that reason, it is number 4 on my list. Number 3 then. Okay, kicking off the top 3. I'm heading back to basic fantasy again. It's going to be Morgan's Fort. It's the place where I'm currently running my players through the campaign. They're still in the old island fortress. We're having a blast playing it. It's in the same vein as Keep on the Borderlands or the Village of Homlet. It's that brilliant little sandbox starting area where you can put it anywhere within your world and just start running a game of Dungeons and Dragons, which, if I may say so, is how it was always intended to be run. There's wilderness, there's the frontier towns, the small points of light that your player characters can get to, and there's all those opportunities for dungeon delving in and around it. I don't want to go too in depth with my synopsis of it, as if my players see this, I don't want to ruin anything for them. A lot of them haven't read through the adventure or played through it before. There's starter dungeons where your characters can make the names. There's damsels in distress that you need to go and rescue. There's goblin parties that are going to harass the party, and there's villains that the characters can get really opposed to, and you can make them into recurring villains, which is what I'm intending to do, hopefully, if my players don't kill them too soon. I can't thank Chris Gonneman enough for the game that he's produced. I can't believe I got into it so late as well. And Morgan's Fault was my original jumping off point into this game. For that reason, it deservedly sits at number 3. Number 2. Number 2 is a little bit of a weird one for me. I converted it so heavily that it was almost unrecognisable from what it was originally. Came out of it was such a fantastic game for me and my old group of players that it had to come and sit up here. It's Tomb of Annihilation from the 5th edition of D&D. Yeah, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, everything has to be world ending. Level 1 PCs are dragged into these adventures that seem way too above their pay scale. I trimmed it right back down, and maybe I'll do a video on it someday, to just a local hex crawl on this really interesting part of the Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms gets a lot of hate. A lot of it is, I'll admit, deservedly. The thing I like about Chult is it offers something different to the usual high fantasy medieval settings that plague the hobby. The fact that the adventure actually tries to, anyway, I mean, you do have to convert it to, me personally, convert it to a different rule set that really heavily focuses on resource management to make it work. The classic druid casting Goodberry from 5th edition really trivialises this adventure, but if you strip it back to Beckme rules or basic fantasy rules, the contents of this book make for a really great adventure. There's hex crawling through the jungles of Chult. You can find interesting locations on the way. There's mad lobster people, villages of frog people, there's were-tigers, there's all manner of these things in the jungles. Port Nyanzaru, which is the home base location, you can do dinosaur racing, which my players absolutely love that part of it. We had so much fun running this adventure, and although my players died when they got to it, the tomb itself and the final battle, again with Acererak, is one that I hope to revisit again with a different group of players and run to its completion. My takeaway from Tomb of Annihilation is not everything has to be world ending. You can grab those books from D&D 5th edition and drag them into your campaign setting. Just ignore all that getting a level 1 party to go and do some level 20 wizards bidding. Ignore all that. Take the time and the effort to rewrite little bits of it here and there, and I promise you that converting some of those adventures will give you a lot of legs out of those books that you've maybe put down because you wanted to get back into the basics of the game. Number 1. Alright then, now I don't think anyone will guess what my number 1 is going to be. It's wildly different to probably the main audience of my channel's preferences. As I said, I'm only recently getting into the OSR and the old TSR stuff. I'm reading it all. I've got my rule cyclopedia. I'm loving it, but I've just not had the chance to run a lot of these games yet and playing them. But my favourite adventure that I have sprinkled into probably every single campaign I've run since I started to DM again is just an absolutely brilliant adventure from the 4th edition of D&D, and arguably I think most people would agree that this is the best adventure from that cursed era of tabletop role-playing. It is another box set written by James Wyatt, Madness at Gardmore Abbey. I'm going to do a full video in the future converting this into basic fantasy role-playing. This is the adventure where I've probably got the most good memories from times around the table with friends and family. It's a really solid, really well written adventure. It's a great sandbox location. There's different levels of diplomacy. Quick breakdown on the adventure then. It's one of your party manages to get their hands on one of the cards from the deck of many things, and you are approached by one of three NPCs who beseech you to find the rest of the deck. And again, it can be very random. One of these NPCs could be a secret collector who actually wants to use the deck for either what they think is just means or maybe their own evil means. So there's loads of replayability. There's a rival adventuring party working against the PCs for most of it. There are different factions within the adventure locale itself, the Gardmore Abbey village and the monastery itself. There's an evil cleric in the crypts who's raised loads of undead and is slowly going mad as he's infected with chaos and the experiments that he's doing. There's a very powerful red dragon who has made his lair and has got a group of kobolds worship him there. There's a powerful orc tribe who control pretty much the whole of the surface. There's a garden that has kind of slipped through the barrier into the Feywild and is infested with displacer beasts and owl bears. Elves from the Feywild are also inside this area. You have a tower that has completely had its interior consumed by the Far Realm, and after a mind-altering adventure through the tower, the group will be at the mercy of a beholder. It's just got so many iconic monsters in this adventure, and I felt like maybe it was my group I was playing with, maybe I can pat myself on the back for how I ran it, but every time I've played it, the group has had so much fun. I've had so much fun running it. It just flows every session. There's always something to do. There's always a new thread to pull on. And at the end of it, the party has the chance to fully construct the deck of many things, and that can turn into a quest of its own afterwards, and it has done for my groups in the past. A brilliant adventure. I can't recommend it enough. It's something that every DM should have, no matter what system you run. If you're playing with fantasy rules, I think you should at least have this adventure to pull from. Guys, that was my top 10 list. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to do a deep dive on more of these adventures in the future. I'll go through how I run them, and hopefully that'll help you in the future, and you can run these for your tables as well. Let me know in the comments what some of your favourite adventures are, and what adventures should I be running at my table. Are there any old TSR adventures that I've not dabbled with yet that you recommend? There's a long reading list, I know, that I need to get on top of. If you like the content, please leave a like, consider subscribing for more of this in the future, and don't forget to press the notification bell to be alerted whenever I post a video. with that being said, that's all we've got time for tonight. So I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.